Most sane people have been wondering how many trips the Panther Clipper Mk2 that has recently been unveiled will save them in colonization as they go about building their Tier 1, Tier 2, or possibly even Tier 3 spaceport with the tens, if some cases even hundreds of thousands of tons of metals and other materials that are required to build them. Less sane pilots, including yours truly, instead have been pondering how can this ship handle itself in AX combat against far-grid interceptors? Because that's the right thing to use it for. Obviously, this is clearly a combat vessel. I'm sure you can tell that it's been born and bred for combat, and I think it'll handle itself incredibly well against a far-grid Hydra. Not only that, but I have signed up. I am actually officially signing up now, since we ran a poll and almost 500 of you answered that poll. Thank you for your input. Sounds like at least half, actually just slightly over half of you wants to see me do a do or die fight against the far-grid Hydra in this thing, with the Panther carrying 1,000 tons of meta alloys, which would result in a loss of about 8 billion worth in credits, as the going rate for meta alloys is about 8 million a ton. This should be an interesting fight, which once the ship comes out after July 22nd, we will live stream with some rules of the house of course, like it is a do or die. So if we get disconnected, we'll have to self-destruct and so on and so forth. As this is going to be a bit of a high stakes fight, obviously started theory crafting a little bit and started thinking about how would we kit this ship in terms of hardpoints and weapons against far-grid Hydra in a one-on-one, which, as you can imagine, is not a particularly easy, because despite my tongue-in-cheek comment that this is a combat ship, this ship is likely to handle extremely poorly. And like most large ships that handle extremely poorly, it will likely have to operate on what is effectively a boost orbit basis, which is not an easy thing to do, especially with a ship that doesn't handle itself particularly well, but it is doable. And in fact, it might be even quite a bit easier than doing so with Type 9 and the Type 10, as this ship with its Class 8 drives is likely going to be notably faster. When it comes to weapons, however, it's a bit of an awkward configuration that we have with 4 smalls, 4 mediums, and 2 large hardpoints. And we'll get into a moment. Actually, it's probably easier if I just show you like my guesstimate of a convergence of this hardpoint configuration. As you can tell from the visual inspection of the ship, there's 2 large hardpoints on the center point of the bottom of the ship, but they are staggered. One is slightly higher compared to the other. I can show this in a way it kind of looks one of the other. There's 2 small hardpoints that are on the side of the center one rear large hardpoint, and then there's 4 on top, in generally 4 medium on top in generally awful positions, and the remaining 2 small hardpoints are on top more towards the center. But the top hardpoints in general are very poorly positioned. The bottom hardpoints instead are a lot more usable, and at a range of 1,500 meters, which is typically the sort of ideal range of Guardian Gauss cannons and Guardian modified shard cannons, the convergence of these weapons, my guess would be that it would look something like the picture that I've put up here for reference, noting that it might be slightly wider than what it's shown here, but if it is slightly wider, it's probably not going to be that much more wide than what we have here. Nevertheless, it is far from pinpoint convergence, and in fact, you are not able to bring to bear all those weapons on a single far-grid hard to snipe, and it's a bit of a question mark on whether you can even get the 2 centerline weapons on hard to bear, because they are so differently positioned from a vertical alignment standpoint. What you likely will be able to get on target, however, is the bottom large hardpoint with the 2 smalls on the side. That's due to the fact that small Guardian Gauss cannons have micro gimbals. So they're able to somewhat kind of like realign a little bit. And at that range, that might get it to pinpoint convergence for hards. So what that tells me and what that hints at me is that using a medium and two small guardian gauss in those three bottom hardpoints is probably a good configuration to go with. A medium up top might not be a bad thing. And then the question is, what do we do with ones up front? And should we even go with gauss to begin with? So in our theory crafting, started tossing out a few ideas of what a configuration for the Panther Clipper Mk2 could look like. The standard and baseline one was to go with those two medium in the bottom large hard points, with two small gauss on the side for the reason I described. And then what do you put on the top four medium? Well, you could go with a bit more exert DPS with an experimental weapon stabilizer if you wanted. You certainly have the internal hardpoints to mount one. However, with a class 7 power distributor, it's not like you can add a lot more distro drain, and beyond that, you're just overdrawing your distributor, and putting additional gauss on the ship would be a waste, in my personal opinion. So we have a saying in the Anti-Exceeding Initiative, which goes, if convergence is whack, it's good for flak. I think Commander Shrinky created this sort of like little saying. And if not, he will certainly correct me, since he reads my comments and does not hesitate of correcting me when I am wrong, which is not infrequently. So thank you, Shrinky, for your corrections. Nevertheless, 4 flak cannons will make short work of even Hydra swarms. And they will be fun to watch, I think. A more reasonable configuration will probably use only 2 flak on the outer mediums, and instead use the 2 medium ones for beam lasers to be coupled with maybe 2 sidle scramblers and the small hard points at the top. That would be more effective, but I think the 4 flak is more fun, so maybe we'll try that one out. So that's one of the configurations that I wanted to try, and it's popular, but not the most popular, at least among those who voted in this most recent poll, which is a lot newer. The most popular configuration is 4 modified shard cannons. 2 that would go in the sort of inner side, inner medium at the top, and 2 that would go in the 2 large at the bottom. You would couple that with 2 flak in the outside mediums, with 2 small thermal vent beam lasers, gimbaled, otherwise you're not hitting anything with it, or at least having a hard time doing it, and 2 sidle scramblers that would significantly speed up the shield phase of the Hydra. Now, this isn't a bad configuration, and in general, modified shard cannons are possibly the best anti-Xeno weapons in the game, which is why I think people are voting so frequently for this option, as it might be what they're most accustomed with or feel is the best as far as weapons goes. And they're not wrong as far as the weapon is concerned. You're not wrong as far as the weapons are concerned. Mod shards certainly are the best weapons in the game. However, the convergence of the shards on this particular ship does give me pause, which is why I am personally not all that inclined to go with a shard configuration. But we shall see. We shall see if convergence turns out to be somewhat different. Again, I'll show you again what I'm estimating it to be, which is this. But we shall see. The third option, which is a very unconventional option, but takes inspiration from the easy mode Corsair that we designed and that is so incredibly popular nowadays. It has really become sort of probably the go-to new AX build for especially newer commanders, because it is so comfy, so easy to use compared to mostly fixed weapon mounts that use gauss or shards. Is a version that uses the 2 medium gauss at the bottom, the vertically aligned large slots, and then instead mounts 3 medium azimuth multi-cannons at the top and just leaves 1 medium slot for flak. Now, this is unconventional because azimuth multi-cannons in general don't do a lot of damage. The large ones are kind of passable, but the medium ones really aren't. Like 3 medium azimuth multi-cannons are probably going to be doing as much damage as a single large azimuth multi-cannon, thereabout, maybe even slightly less. I haven't done the math, but we're in that ballpark. So it is something that you would generally not do. And whether this is viable, it's a big question mark, which I think is why so few people have like selected this. Uh, Probably you have similar reservations as the ones I have. And then you would have two small thermal vent beams for cooling and two cyber scramblers for additional shield DPS. So that'd be the third option. The fourth option, which instead is probably the closest to the easy mode build of a Corsair, is a build that has two modified plasma chargers at the top in the sort of more central medium slots, two flak on the outside, and two large azimuth multi-cannons in the slots down at the bottom, in addition to the usual two small thermal vent beams and two cyber scramblers. Now, this clearly is very similar to the Corsair, despite the fact that it's going to fly nothing like Corsair. But that's another story, in that it has the same two NPCs and two instead of three, but the difference is not humongous, large azimuth multi-cannons. It also has significantly higher shield DPS with its two Cytos and its two small thermal vent beam lasers. I also asked in the kind of survey if you could guess which one I would personally prefer among these. And in the comments, there's been some debate, so the answer is already there for some of you might have already seen it. But what do you think? See if you can guess in the next moment or two. Well, the answer, my personal answer, is that there's really two right answers here in my mind. As in, I think the Gauss build will work. I think the Gauss build will work either in its meme version with a 4 flak or in a less memey, more actual practical version with 2 medium and 4 small beams, which is also significantly overdrawn. So it's meme in one way or the other. But I think the combination of 2 medium and 2 small Gauss cannons will actually work reasonably well and is generally a pretty good fit for a class 7 power distributor that operates on a single heatsink basis when you're firing at the max fire rate. That's one thing that I think I'm going to try and I think will actually work in a reasonable way. And depending on how far apart the two medium slots are, if the two medium slots are close enough that you can get them actually on target at 1500 meters together on the same heart, then that is going to be incredibly effective of a sniper. Although it's a bit of a question whether that will happen. The other option, which I think will also work, which is a bit more comfy and definitely easier as far as exerts are concerned, but possibly will turn out to be harder when it comes to hard sniping, is the fourth one. It's the one that mounts two medium plasma chargers, two medium modified plasma chargers, and two large azimuth multi-cannons. The azimuth multi-cannons are gimbaled, so even as a boost orbiter, you should be able to reasonably stay on target, noting that the aim of those multi-cannons, especially when you're boost orbiting, isn't great. So if you're boost orbiting, you might be struggling to get hits on target, and especially as you're boost orbiting, you have to be careful not to get the interceptor too high above you, because if you get the interceptor too high above you, the multi-cannons will be blocked by your own ship and won't fire, because multi-cannons won't fire through your ship. That would not be good for you. And so you need to kind of make sure that you're keeping your pitch so that you're keeping the interceptor roughly towards the middle, if not even the bottom of your screen, so that your multi-cannons are actually firing on the interceptor if you're doing that. But we shall see in practice how that works. I think the first one is going to be overall easier for snipes and somewhat harder for exerts. I think the fourth one is going to be somewhat easier for exerts and somewhat harder for snipes, because yes, ADSs can auto aim, but they don't do a lot of damage, and Hydra Hearts are incredibly tanky. So we'll see. What do you think? Which one will be the most successful, or which one would you build? And what do you think? Am I going to be successful in my 101, or am I going to be leaving 8 billion credits in cargo and on the wreckage of a Panther Clipper when it comes out? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and glory to mankind. Commander Mechan, over and out.